Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today. I hope you're all doing well. Today, we're gathering once more to talk about Bethesda, but before any of that, I do want to get into something much more important. It's really easy to get tunnel vision, particularly with gaming news, where a company will say something that really annoys you, and that may be the worst thing that happens to you all day. I consider that personally a blessing, that if the worst thing that happened to me throughout my day is some company said something mildly irritable, then I have a pretty good day. I have a pretty good life around me if that's the worst that's happened to me, because looking around the world, there's much worse happening to other people right now. In particular, I just want to send some love to the folks down in Florida. 3 of my best friends live there. It's no joke what's happening there with back-to-back hurricanes and this new one in Milton looking really serious. Link down below. I will have a charity for you to go ahead and donate to if you have the means and the resources to do so. Obviously, no pressure if you do not. I threw a couple $100 there myself, and I'm looking to donate to ones dedicated to animal shelters next time around because I saw a video of an animal tied to a post right before the storm, and it really broke my heart. And I've been donating to animal charities for like over a decade now, so I'll be keeping my eyes open for that, but wanted to help out the people first. Just send my love to those who are down there right now. Remember, be safe, and there's only one you, so please take care of yourselves. And with that, let's talk a bit about some video games. Let's talk about Bethesda, what's going on there. So in our last upload with Bethesda, we were talking about the harsh reality that came in with Starfield and its Shattered Space DLC, where there's a lot of concern setting in and potentially a level of arrogance just based on developer interviews we saw done. Well, Bethesda has now responded to some of the Starfield Shattered Space criticism, and I think it's worth highlighting as well. In all honesty, I've had a ton of Bethesda videos in the chamber for a while on things I really want to talk about with the future of this company, because for me, as a big Bethesda fan, this was a big point of reflection for me with the quality of Shattered Space, and especially now with what Emil Pagliarulo and Todd are saying, even more so, it has caused me to reflect on the future of their products. So no doubt, don't worry, we'll talk about things like Elder Scrolls 6, but since the situation developed, again, I wanted to get this video out first. And also, Bethesda and Ubisoft aren't making it easy for my channel to look like an uplifting place for gaming. Typically, we're talking about a lot of good stuff. Unfortunately, the reality is sometimes things go bad. And right now, between all these companies I cover and I'm juggling, nothing's really going well right now. So yeah, I'm trying not to like batter one company down completely in like 4 uploads in a row. I think that's very boring. So yeah, I want to make sure I'm trying to spread the wealth, if you will, a little bit. But anyway, let's get into it, shall we? Let's talk about what brought this to my attention, which was a pure Xbox post. I was doing my research for Defining Duke, and I came across this headline that said Starfield design director defends Shattered Space DLC after mixed reviews. And I think mixed, frankly, is putting it lightly, because right now it's sitting on Steam at a mostly negative rating, which, again, if you look at Bethesda Game Studios, like even something like Fallout 76 is pulled out of its negative rating. Starfield sits at a mixed, but mostly negative is, to me at least, a shocking new low for them, where everyone, even Starfield fans, are like, this really isn't it. So what did Emil Pagliarulo have to say in response to his interview that we covered on Games Radar, where he said things like, we think that Starfield is our best game yet in a lot of ways? What does he say in response to that? Well, he posted the interview, and then a fan went on a bit of a response spree to Emil on Twitter saying like this was very tone deaf, pretty much echoing what a lot of us felt. Like this was tone deaf, disconnected from the fans, and it feels like you're patting yourself on the head when you don't really deserve to do so given the current feedback for the game. So here's what Emil said in response, and then I'll give some thoughts on it. He wrote, Twitter/X has never been a place for polite discourse, but I'd like to address what I can. I don't like leaving fans hanging. In fact, I generally say more than I should. We have a community team for a reason, but I think a bridge to the devs is important. First, the interview. As the design director, sometimes I'm asked or instructed to do interviews. I was happy to do that, to represent the designers and the studio. Seeing how hard and passionately they worked on Shattered Space, they deserve nothing less. Optimism and excitement are pretty standard for interviews, and I'm generally pretty optimistic and excitable about games by nature. That said, my optimism is in no way meant to be mud in the eye of any dissatisfied fan. That's not how it works. I'm also very proud of Shattered Space. We all are. Most of the quests and levels were done by designers who have worked on previous Bethesda games and DLCs going all the way back to Morrowind. They're good at what they do, and it shows. If folks haven't played Shattered Space and they like Starfield, I think they're missing out. If folks have played Shattered Space and still don't like it, that makes me sad, honestly. Just know that we've been hearing from plenty of folks who do love it. Maybe it's a game of expectations. Fans want a lot, and we all do what we can to accommodate them. Here's what I can tell you. Nobody, and I mean nobody at Bethesda, is patting themselves on the back while ignoring our players. In addition to Shattered Space, we've also spent a lot of time this year addressing community concerns and making fixes. We'll continue to do so, and we'll be listening to our fans every step of the way. We make these games for all of you. Starfield is a massive game, and it takes time for us to address things. We move as fast as we can, as safely as we can. Game development is always tricky, but with a game as big as Starfield, every fix could potentially break something, which is something Bethesda's been saying since before the game even launched. To close, let me just say, I love games. I love Bethesda's games. I've been playing them since the Terminator days. All I or anyone here wants to do is make those games and then make them better. No ego, no arrogance, just a lot of hard work and appreciation for our fans. And honestly, I think this goes back to what I've said, which is that soloing out just one individual, whether it be Emil or Todd, is problematic in trying to fix what's going on with Bethesda here, which is, as I've said before, I think a systemic issue. I don't think it boils down to one person, but a collective mindset about how they approach their games. And we'll get into that in a little bit with what Todd Howard said in a separate interview where he described their games as irresponsibly large. And those are higher up decisions that are being made where they're focusing on quantity over quality. We'll get into all of that. But to me, again, it goes down to a systemic issue and not just one particular individual. I think what Emil says here, for the most part, is actually pretty solid. In fact, his transparency in one way actually highlights, I think, one of the biggest problems with Shattered Space, and again, why I think it's a systemic issue. We'll get into that in just a moment. But by and large, I have no problem with developers acknowledging, like, hey, we get how this looks. We're not trying to rub mud in your face. I'm just excited about what we made. But excitement doesn't equal good, as we all know. I'm an excitable person, famously so, Mr. Near Perfect, right? So yeah, like, I totally can sympathize with this kind of person who's just passionate and excited. And I do appreciate him taking head on, like, no ego, no arrogance. Like, we're just here to do the work. It's really in the middle what he says that is quite revealing to me personally, where I'll read it again. He says, most of the quests and levels were done by designers who have worked on previous Bethesda games and DLCs, going all the way back to Morrowind. They're good at what they do, and it shows. That honestly scares me. And I'm going to be honest, because to me, it felt like this was not the traditional Bethesda experience I know and love. And I know for a fact I haven't outgrown it because I go back and play many of their games. And hell, I'll even say this. I've gone back to Fallout 76 multiple times this year because of the updates they provided since the Fallout TV show. And the wandering experience there is also good. So I think it just may be a problem with how you explore in Starfield. I don't think the Rev 8 feels particularly good, especially because you can't, like, call it in whenever you want to call it in order to travel around the world you're on. You just kind of have to make sure it's next to you and that you're parking in the right spot and you remember where you parked it. But it's also that you can, like, skip pack and jump pack everywhere and float over environments and key locations. And I know that provides that space explorer feel for some, but I do think Bethesda games feel best when they're rooted in the ground itself and you're not flying everywhere. So it could just be a design issue with Starfield. But when I hear, like, oh no, these are the same teammates that have been making your favorite games for a while, that's when I go, there's a problem here. There is a problem here big time, because for me with Starfield Shattered Space, it was not like, oh, this is more Starfield. Because I actually think Starfield base game is way better than Shattered Space. Way better in terms of writing, questing, character development, hell, even gameplay to a degree, because I thought the exploration and things I found were really lacking. So just that lack of quality there is what's scary to me, that, oh, these are the same people making the things you like, but there's a lower quality bar here. Like, my read of the situation is genuinely a little bit of a, we just want to move on to Elder Scrolls 6 type energy I'm getting from this DLC because of just how haphazard it felt, how half-baked it felt, how overpriced it felt. There was something off about this whole project here after playing it. And it seems like Bethesda's committing to doing more, that they're going to continue to support it. And I can admire sticking with it. Certainly after Fallout 76 and its major resurgence this year, I don't blame Bethesda for sticking with any failed project at this point. And Starfield isn't a failure. It's just to many a disappointment, which there is, believe it or not, a difference between these two. But I thought what Emil said here was quite illuminating. But continuing on that subject matter of systemic issues here, Todd Howard did an interview recently, and VGC covered it, saying Todd Howard says Bethesda's games are irresponsibly large and explains why. Quote, my job on the games often is to be the director, a little bit more like a movie director, he said, where you're bringing all the parts together from the art, the cinematography, the technology that our engineers are building to bring these worlds to life. And obviously, there's all the writing and the quest design and the level designer. And there's so many parts to our games that I'm in a really unique position to work with so many amazing people and bring all of that together. Smirking, he then added, Actually, we cut very little from our games at Bethesda, which is why the games are so irresponsibly large, end quote. So I watched the interview. This is said a little bit in jest, but again, I do find it particularly telling because one of the key issues with Starfield is, as Todd puts it here, it is irresponsibly large. That is the best definition for it, because even as someone who very enjoyed Starfield, I think general constructive criticism across myself and the community has said that this game is so big, you have neutered one of the key components out of a Bethesda Game Studios experience, which is the ability to wander, the ability to explore. The concerning part, as I mentioned earlier, is that you gave it to us in Shattered Space and the quality was lower than, for me, like as I've really let the dust settle on this DLC, I think it may be my least favorite out of anything they've done, barring Workshop DLC from Fallout 4 and the horse armor, like the obvious things. If we're talking quest expansions and whatnot, I really do feel like, even Dawnguard is better because Dawnguard at least was a cool story and you could become a vampire and I love the visuals for it, but Shattered Space across the board for me was just extremely disappointing. But that aside, they gave us what we wanted there. That's a whole separate problem. When they didn't give us what we wanted, we got something from Starfield which felt way too big than it ever needed to be. The planets led to so many loading screens. Because there were so many planets, it led to procedural generated content all over the place. In turn, as someone who plays these games and tries to 100% them anytime they can, it's very difficult to 100% Starfield because you don't know where you're going to find content because it's difficult to discover content because you're not in like a localized area where you can seek out and find people and collect that content, because you can find that content when you like warp into a random star system somewhere. So it's a little too haphazard. And for some people, that's the magic of it. And I totally respect and understand that. But when you call it irresponsibly large, this is where I would love to see some sort of inside reporting on what's going on Bethesda Game Studios, because what I am seeing continuously is a focus on quantity, not quality. They've talked about building the simulations, building the worlds that people, quote, want to live in. And I think people want to play in these worlds. That's what I've always said. And I think part of living in these worlds is just it being fun to play within and doing things that kind of maintain, if you will, that simulation that Bethesda talks about so often. And that's things like letting you stay on planet for a really long time. Like that's probably the best thing about Shattered Space is I'm in one spot for a long time. And that's the place I most intimately know about Starfield. Not with great memories, but at least I had that experience like I would in a BGS game where I got to know a pocket of this universe very closely by interacting with its people, by exploring its cities and nearby locations. Like that's what we're looking for, of course. But when it's so big that you can only get that in certain pockets, again, it presents the problem here. And I hope that Bethesda starts to focus more on quality. They've been talking more about quality measurements, like in interviews in the past. Todd's really mentioned how, like we're trying to make sure we do it well when we do decide to do something. And I can respect that. I think the best example I can provide is Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, right? This is a game that when it came out in 2006, it was mind-blowing how big and expansive it was. And then you learned that Bethesda Game Studios was under 100 people when they made that game. It was so impressive. Now, as time has gone on, you go back to Oblivion and you see the dungeons and look, like they all look pretty similar, but it's understandable in hindsight. It's one person who made over 100 some odd dungeons. Hundreds of dungeons have been made by the same person. And Shivering Isles does a better job of varying it up a little bit, tying the design together a little bit more. You don't get lost as often in those dungeons, but for the most part, they're pretty repetitive and similar and use one of like 4 different structures on the interiors to kind of decorate them. And so they largely all feel the same. That's because back then, that was a big deal to see something as expansive as Oblivion because technology was progressing. Now we're at a point where technology isn't moving as far, and so standards are raising in different areas. Bethesda, when they built something like Starfield, felt like they were in the Oblivion mindset. And look, hey, guilty as charged. I was all for that energy. I love Oblivion. When I saw the connections being drawn between Starfield and Oblivion, I was very excited about that. But obviously, we know how all that went with things like procedurally generated content, which is my least favorite style of content, as well as how the exploration went. Being irresponsibly large nowadays isn't good for gaming. In fact, people want shorter games. They want tighter games. They still want bang for their buck, but there's ways to deliver that. And again, I think BGS focusing on choice, quality, tighter exploration. I hope just these are consistent values that are baked into Elder Scrolls 6, which we'll, again, talk about in a future video on am I concerned or not about Elder Scrolls 6. But by and large, just taking a look at what they're saying here, it just seems to me like there is a problem with how they approach their games. And some people will be like, well, it's not really for you, Matty. It's like, get out of here. I've been playing these games my entire life. They're absolutely for people like me. It's just, I think they're getting away from what made them special because their design philosophies are not evolving with the times and what is needed from gamers and their games, by the way. They don't need to make Oblivion style games in 2024 and 2025. You know, if anything, they should be just targeting what couldn't Oblivion do. So those are my general thoughts on what's going on here in Bethesda's response to Starfield's criticism. It's just sad to see them in this spot, but obviously, I think everyone knows, I'm cheering for them. I hope they get back on track here. I hope Starfield Shattered Space is just a bump in the road, but no doubt it's a point to really reflect. I think for them as a team, if they're not reflecting, that is a problem. I will say that. Like, I respect Emil going out, defending his team, that sort of thing, saying like, hey, we think it's actually pretty good. But if you are not reflecting, that is a big problem there. It's not the time to get your back up and say, actually, it is good. Because it's like, no, if you got me sitting here who like knows your DLC intimately inside out saying this might be the worst thing you've made, you got a big problem there. And you got to take a look at yourselves in the mirror and say, like, what went wrong here? And just be objective about it. I know it's tough to hear, but you got to be objective about it because I think Elder Scrolls 6 hangs on a lot of this, your ability to respond to feedback and do things correctly. So we'll see what happens. Of course, you know me, I'll be right on top of it. We have much more Bethesda content on the way, so keep an eye out with that. Take excellent care of yourselves. Again, link down below if anyone wants to support any of the charities, and I will catch you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.